Hi everyone. So I'm Juliet. I'm a reader in architecture and urbanism at Cardiff University. I think of myself as an interdisciplinary scholar. I'm writing a book actually at the moment called Care in the City, Architecture, Urbanism, Ethics, in which ideas and practices of maintenance and maintainability play an important role. And this paper comes out of some of the research I've been doing towards that. So just to start with a quote. I've had 3 o'clock in the morning, a 3 o'clock in the morning knock on the door, just with a leaky tap. I said, this can be dealt with in the morning. You don't need to do it now. You literally have to go to their flat, put a cloth under the tap, say, look, I can't hear it now. We'll sort it out in the morning. This quote comes from a local resident involved through a tenant residents association in the maintenance of a social housing estate. It refers to an exchange over a routine maintenance issue, a leaky tap. But it also illustrates how maintenance work can be about far more than just responding to the demands of that leaky tap. The person whose tap leaks is vulnerable, and their vulnerability becomes apparent when this happens. They can't cope with it, it stresses them out. And the simple act of putting a cloth under the tap, as well as coming out at no charge in the middle of the night, are also acts of care towards the person. A lot has been written about maintenance and repair over the past decade and more. Much of this has focused on the maintenance or repair of physical entities, of technical artifacts or systems. Looking at the maintenance and repair of such things, Thrift and Graham tell us, reveals the instability of all forms of order, the entropic tendencies of materials and systems. Nothing endures the predations wrought by use, by consumption or weather. All apparently firm and solid things must be maintained. The maintenance of things, Jerome and Pontiel, whose paper written in 2014 I draw on, suggest can be understood as a kind of care. This, they argue, is because maintenance is attuned to the fragilities of materiality, but also because in directly engaging with them, it seeks to stabilize and strengthen, to make good and continue. Such actions resonate with Fisher and Tronto's broad definition of care as a species activity that includes everything we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, life-sustaining web. They resonate with the phases that Fisher and Tronto regard as key to understanding care, not just as a practice, but also as an ethic, a practice shaped by values and moral principles, including caring about or attentiveness, caring for as responsibility, caregiving involving certain competencies, and receiving care as responsiveness. Thus, in Pontiel and Dennis's work, the maintenance and repair of signs in the Paris metro is shown to embody an ethic of care involving close observation, a bodily commitment, as they put it, to careful work, and the exercise of professional competencies of various kinds. So springing from the issues I identified in that opening quote, in this paper I want to build on these ideas by emphasizing how maintenance, repair as ways of caring for things are actions that are or are not also caring towards their users, to those who might benefit from these actions, those for whom how and when a job is done and how they feel that they are handled in the process also matters. My motive is a sense that good maintenance in social housing, rather as Moll showed in her study of good feeding in nursing homes, is as reliant on communication, on interpersonal competencies, and on empathy towards people as thinking, feeling inhabitants and service users, as on skill in dealing with technicalities and materialities. Obviously, the two are closely interwoven. So my case study is a group of housing estates in Bermondsey, South London, a traditionally working-class area that grew up around the London docks and the leather industry. The estates embody different eras of responsiveness to housing need, from the Meakin estate, which formed part of a huge housing programme carried out by the London County Council in the 1930s, to 1970s tower blocks, which you can see in the slide there, built by the LCC in the context of the post-war mass housing boom. Historically, the estates were managed and maintained by Southwark Borough Council, but in 1996, a joint management board called the Leather Market JMB was created by residents making use of the introduction of new legislation enabling council tenants to themselves assume responsibilities for the management of their homes and to form tenant management organisations, or TMOs. This was driven by an imperative to improve day-to-day repairs and estate cleaning activities, seen by the JMB to have become neglected, at least in part as a result of the remoteness of the council bureaucracy from the everyday lives, needs and priorities of tenants. The JMB's goal is to manage the estates in a more resident-facing way, as they put it, seeing this as key to sound financial management as well as resident satisfaction and well-being. It refers to its approach, interestingly, as a form of organised compassion, involving approaches to the cleaning, maintenance, repair, and increasingly the adaptation of the physical environment that are tuned not just to buildings, but to patterns of everyday living, forms of social vulnerability, including mental health issues, ageing, and financial hardship, to issues of collective living in multicultural and also rapidly gentrifying neighbourhoods. Just before moving on, I should just briefly explain that there's a broader backdrop to these goals. Across London, maintenance and repair issues and the pressure on social housing providers to meet the decent homes standard introduced by the Labour government in 2000 have helped to shift the focus of housing governance towards market-oriented asset management structures and strategies. And in many cases, regeneration efforts geared to improving the built environment have been seen to erode the social purpose of housing. Embedded in the JMB's notion of organised compassion is a commitment to maintaining both buildings and social purpose, and thereby avoiding the environmentally costly demolitions that have been characterising regeneration across London and the social cleansing, so-called, that this has been associated with. So what does its approach teach us about care and housing maintenance? So just very briefly, research towards this paper involved spending a week here in Bermondsey in July 2018, and then a range of follow-up interviews that year and also this year. The interviews focused on unpacking the JMB's approach to resident-facing housing and endeavouring to understand what care concepts of attentiveness, responsibility, competence and responsiveness meant in the context of this work. So there are a range of points, and I'll just very briefly describe each one. So attentiveness, or the capacity to care about, is facilitated, according to the head of maintenance, Ron Elston, by being absolutely hands-on, as he put it. Being hands-on means working on-site rather than remotely, immersed in the life of the estates, and having a dedicated team to carry out inspections and arising maintenance works, rather than, say, relying on piecemeal contract work, which has been one of the key ways in which housing maintenance has been privatised and also casualised in England. Ron stressed the significance of this for fire safety maintenance in particular, a major focus of work post-Grenfell, given that fire risk is generated at the interface between building technology and the everyday use of buildings. Attentive to this, Ron's inspections focus not just on the fire systems and compliance with regulations, but look for, as he put it, anything that's been left on the stairs, anything that can catch fire, on the maintenance issues generated by everyday life. But being hands-on also involves being accessible to residents. As one resident put it in interview, Southwark have a call centre for everything, whereas the JMB is a more independent, personalised thing. One of the key ways in which a personalised maintenance service is facilitated is through a surgery held daily at the JMB offices. This enables the JMB to stay abreast of the multiple technical issues arising constantly in buildings, from plumbing leaks to drafty windows to lifts, by drawing on the expertise of residents in how their environments are working. It has also enabled the JMB to become aware of how differently people experience maintenance issues, of how they affect them. The anxiety, for example, of an elderly person who finds herself unable to leave her block because of the broken lift, and how, on occasion, maintenance needs also go beyond issues of plumbing or damp. They are needs for conversation because of loneliness, frailty, or insecurity. The offer of conversation, and as Ron put it, repeat prescription of an empathetic ear, followed sometimes by a visit and a chat, has hence become an established part of maintenance and repair work. The second point is attentiveness as the recognition of plurality, which actually comes from somebody else's work on attention as an important aspect of care. Attentiveness involves a preparedness to see beyond one-size-fits-all solutions and recognize maintenance issues as arising as a result of different patterns of living. So, for example, Ron explained that maintenance issues have arisen as a result of the increasingly multicultural demographics of the estates, as different cultures have different approaches to bathing and to cooking, or to how they care for themselves and their families. The damage created when the bathing habits of one neighbour in an upstairs flat cause a leak or a flood have the potential to add fuel to forms of local intercultural tension. In such cases, maintenance and repair team members must decide what to do. One solution would be to adapt the bathroom in the upstairs flat, recognising as legitimate that for cultural reasons some people would live better with a wet room than a conventional British bathroom with a bath. But the significance is the diversion of precious funds which the whole estate needs to those tenants. Another is to simply repair the damaged paintwork in the lower flat and to speak to those that caused it. But that is an approach that could reinforce a sense of difference and alienation on the part of those residents who are obviously entitled to be there. Care for Ron involves a combination of these approaches, recognising the commonality of resources and yet also the specificities of uses and needs. Another example is when people make different sorts of demands on the maintenance team. As Ron put it, quote, "Some tenants don't even come forward when there is work to be done, requiring the team to be alert beyond mere reliance on their capacities to articulate their claims to ensure needs of dry, safe shelter." So thirdly, attentiveness involves a recognition that what is maintained is often for residents not just fabric, not just asset, not just a set of technical specifications or a unit within an allocated budget, but people's homes. Setting out to maintain a home may require different sorts of or levels of work to simply maintaining dry shelter, with implications clearly for how finances are managed. Ron gave the example of an elderly person living up 3 flights of narrow stairs and in a flat with a bathroom that has been difficult to use for some time. In the short term, she needs a walk-in shower, and soon she will need a chairlift. She could be moved to a lower-level flat, which would have the advantage of allowing her 4-bedroom flat, which is in excess of her needs, to be freed up for a family. There would, of course, be care in this. But on the other hand, she's been there for 30 years and she doesn't want to move. The decision is taken to make adaptations, even though, as Ron explained with a certain weariness, when the property comes back to the landlord, we will have to take all those adaptations out. The decision is facilitated, of course, by financial resources, but driven by an evaluation of what material actions would do least harm to the resident, most maintain the meanings she connects to her home, while making it more livable, more comfortable. I should just add that this doesn't necessarily typify decisions made in relation to elderly people in these buildings. Sometimes they are moved, but they are always involved in that decision. So the next is the timings or the temporality of care. Attention, it was clear, has a lot to do with the time between having an issue raised, whether it was to do with a home or a common facility such as a lift, and when the work is done. One of the residents interviewed compared their situation under the JMB in contrast to the local authority. As with Southwark, if you wanted anything done, you had to wait for it. You could wait up to 3 weeks for it to be done, even longer. But luckily for us, all we need is to phone over and hopefully, touch wood, we get seen within 3 days. It may not, of course, be such a stark difference as this between the local authority and the JMB, but what is important in this quote is what it says about reliability and the importance of reliability, itself a form of recognition of the impacts of waiting and uncertainty, particularly as a maintenance issue develops, on emotional well-being, as on trust, everyday routines, and so on. Fifth is a commitment to quality. Responsibility for maintenance is a matter of contractual obligations between landlord and tenant. Care, of course, is not a matter of adherence to contractual agreements, but about taking care in the process of doing so, about the attitudes that characterize adherence to such agreement and the work required to perform them. As Ron put it, quote, "We pride ourselves on making sure that it's the standard of the tenancy agreement. This is key to avoiding the need for court settlements. It is key to avoiding a situation such as Grenfell, as he put it, where it took an accident to prompt adequate attentiveness and a court case to expose fundamental failures of care." In reality, Ron seeks for more than mere adherence to standards. He instructs his team, quote, to deliver what they would expect to deliver in their own homes, as I don't think you can fall short of that, implying that the standards of care for the self, of protection of self-interest, should govern the ethics of workmanship. This reflects a broader institutional commitment on the part of the JMB to, quote, go the extra mile. At Leather Market, Ron said, there is a, quote, institutional commitment that feeds into the work that every individual does. From the resident side, prescribed responsibilities relate to the upholding of the terms of the tenancy agreement, clearly. But care is evident, again, in how they do so, in those who, in looking after their flats, understand, as Ron put it, that they are taking responsibility for our budgets. Some take on additional responsibilities through DIY clubs that help people accomplish small improvements that fall beyond the duties of the JMB, such as putting up shelves or painting. Others do so by volunteering to play key roles within the Residents' Association, by participating in gardening projects, by helping to maintain outdoor spaces for the benefit of the whole community. As chair of the Residents' Association put it, people take on the responsibility because they live here. We want to help. That's why we're doing it. The work they do allows funds to be available for goods such as adaptations of flats for the elderly. But while recognising this as caretaking, it is of course important to recognise that this work, like so much care work, is unpaid for, though highly valuable and valued, necessitated as a result of broader financing issues in social housing today. And that's one of the images of that flat. So competencies, sixth, maintenance involves careful compliance with regulation, with building regulations, the decent home standard, and so on, with meeting standards of good workmanship and safety. It involves, as other repair scholars have noted, improvisation and ingenuity in relation to historic buildings and diagnostic puzzles to solve what Houston called the puzzle of the broken thing. Often it involves picking up latent defects related to design or poor quality construction. But as Ron put it, it also involves competencies in talking and listening, piecing together the fragments of an account or several accounts to understand what has happened and what might have caused it. It involves competencies inevitably in terms of stress management, as worry about vulnerable people and fire issues can become overwhelming, as can frustrations with others' attitudes, of course. So then finally, responsiveness as trust. Finally, residents in particular highlighted that the practices of hearing their needs and responding in a timely way had enabled them to become increasingly trusting of management over time and more secure in their neighbourhoods. This did not mean that they were entirely confident that they would be able to stay long term. They understood that broader forces governing rental values and funding could make the JMB's business plan unviable. Responsiveness could also be understood to include community cohesion in cases where maintenance was able to resolve issues arising from different ways of using buildings and the conflicts these could produce. It includes the maintenance of place attachments, as all actions that keep the estate going as a livable place are also ways of maintaining a sense of home and community. It includes the evident desire among residents interviewed to play a part in maintenance, if only by taking care of plants outside their front door. So then, as in terms of some concluding points, in much of the literature that deals with maintenance and repair, these activities are invariably presented as good. This paper has shown how important people are in understanding them in this way in the context of social housing and maintenance. Maintenance is care when it is attuned not to just to fabrics, not just to buildings, but to those who experience its effects on their homes and for whom how the process is carried out is significant. Maintenance then is an act of social care, a care of complex socio-material assemblages. And seeing it in this way, I argue, has important implications for understanding maintenance, but also for how decisions regarding the governance, the funding, the management, the design, and most importantly, the continuity in social housing in London and elsewhere are approached. Thank you.